As the United States of America began to expand and take shape in the early 1800s, the area that would become Wisconsin was considered the western frontier, Indian country by the nation's leaders. But it was also a source of the world's rich fur trade, run first by France and later Britain, using the trapping skills of the native tribes. And those economic ties translated into a military alliance.
That French and Indian alliance that most Americans are familiar with in the context of the French and Indian War, that alliance basically sprang up out of Wisconsin. During the 17th century, Wisconsin was actually the scene of a refugee crisis of sorts, occasioned by the expansion of the Iroquois out of New York in search of more fur to feed the global fur trade.
The Iroquois tribe worked with the French and British, forcing tribes in the east out of their native lands. They were pushed to the frontier west of Lake Michigan, then part of the Illinois Territory. When they arrived, they began to crowd the people who already lived here: the Menominee, the Ho-Chunk, the Chippewa, and the Potawatomi. Traditional territories were challenged, future threatened.
This onslaught of newcomers overburdened the ecosystem of Wisconsin, and it created an intense competition for resources. And so there were a number of military engagements in Wisconsin about which there's very scanty, reliable historical information between Ho-Chunks and these neighboring newcomers. Even though the conclusion of the American Revolution recognizes the United States' claim to this whole region, the United States has no effective control over it whatsoever, because the British continue to occupy military posts in the region, and they continue to dominate the fur trade.
And when they faced the U.S. again in the War of 1812, Wisconsin, still nearly 40 years from becoming a state, was under more British influence than American.
On the eve of the War of 1812, there's a great deal of ambivalence on the part of most of the residents of this region about what side they want to take.
Military historian John Hall from the University of Wisconsin says natives generally sided with the British due to the fur trade and the fact that American policy generally took land from Indians for settlers. In 1814, the U.S. decided to build a fort on the Western Front, an outpost where the Wisconsin River empties into the Mississippi at Prairie du Chien. But the British had the upper hand in the upper Great Lakes, and they attacked the American garrison at Fort Shelby on July 17, 1814. Fire! In one of the only U.S. military battles fought on Wisconsin soil, the British Indian force overwhelmed the much smaller American unit.
The Battle of Prairie du Chien really isn't much of a battle.
And after 3 days, the U.S. commander surrendered. 60 American troops were captured, 7 wounded. 3 native troops in the British unit were hurt. 6 months later, the War of 1812 was over, with another U.S. victory over Britain. As a way to help settle the wilderness, the U.S. government paid its troops here in land, 120 acres of what would become Wisconsin.